I want to hold your hand. How Paul's handwriting revolved into Billy's. In this video, I will analyse the handwriting of Paul McCartney from samples of his writing taken from when he was aged 10 through to his early 20s. I will then compare Paul's handwriting to Billy's handwriting from samples taken from his teens through to his late 30s. Let me first make two declarations. I'm not a professional graphologist. It's simply a hobby of mine, and you should take my analysis with a pinch of salt. It's just a bit of fun. Secondly, finding examples of handwriting that are of suitable quality and authenticity has been difficult, especially for Paul's samples. No one can be 100% sure of the authenticity of a piece of writing unless they personally witnessed it being written, so there's always the chance of dealing with a fake. However, I am fairly sure that the samples I have used are genuine, based on their subject matter, lexicon, and my analysis of their characteristics. Paul was famously left-handed, and only around 10% of the general population are left-handed. Writing with your left hand when it isn't your dominant hand is difficult. I know this to be true. I am right-handed, and I have learnt to write with my left hand as an exercise into the mindset of left-handedness. It has been an invaluable experience and markedly improved my ability to assess handwriting for genuine left-handedness. Also, Paul wrote with an upright hand position. Only about 10% of people do this as well, using either hand. We can tell Paul wrote with an upright hand position by looking at photographs and videos of him signing autographs. This makes the nature of Paul's handwriting rare on two accounts. 10% of 10% is 1%. This means the chance of faking his handwriting successfully is actually pretty low. With all of that said, let's start by looking at a list of things graphologists look for in a piece of writing. They include letter and word size, zone proportion, slant, width of letters and words, degree of connection, form of connection, letter form type, shading, especially when changing direction, pressure, initial and terminal strokes, margin sizes, distance between letters, words, and lines, baseline direction, regularity of letter form, rhythm, speed, letter form quality, capitals, the personal pronoun I dots and T bars, lower extensions and loops, punctuation, signature, and any signs of dishonesty. This is typically things like the serial killer D, which is a very far right-leaning D, and the felon's claw, usually found on Y's and G's. Now let's look at the first example of Paul's handwriting from the age of 10 years and 10 months. Here he is, writing about the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. It's a formal piece of writing, quite possibly for a school assessment of some kind. Please take note of the way that Paul forms his capital Ds. They are one of the clearest and most consistent ways to discern his handwriting from Billy's. More about that later. Overall, the handwriting is of a normal size, albeit slightly small. This shows a person who is realistic, accurate, peaceful, and diplomatic. The middle zone of his letters is the smallest. This shows a slight concern for the present and Paul's everyday practical matters at this stage of his life. The upper zone of his letters is more developed and contains some balloon-like flourishes. This means Paul showed signs of imagination, intelligence, creativity, ambition, and a sense of humour, even at the age of 10. The extended lower zone, with only occasional retracing of letter forms, shows that Paul had a warm and receptive nature, largely free from fear and inhibition. Overall, the slant of Paul's handwriting is unusually upright, as previously stated. This demonstrates that he was logical, self-reliant, and self-controlled, a good person to know in a crisis. The width of his letters is normal and balanced, showing him to be flexible in his relationships with others, being able to either be close or reserved when appropriate. Paul had neat, well-connected handwriting, which is mostly copybook in style, with flourishes on the capitals. In an adult's handwriting, the copybook style would write him off as conventional or even dull, but it is to be expected in the handwriting of a 10-year-old who would have not long learned to write cursively. Given his age and the use of a fountain pen, which requires its own degrees of mastery, his writing is quite mature in nature. There is a small amount of shading when changing direction. This is often seen in the handwriting of artists. Paul mostly used medium pressure, with occasional stops or jerks which made the pressure heavier. He also had to change ink cartridge near the bottom of the page, which made it seem darker. The medium pressure of Paul's handwriting shows a reasonable amount of intensity to his demeanour. Generally speaking, the heavier the pressure, the more willpower and aggression the person has. He also uses normal copybook-style initial and terminal strokes, with a tendency towards garland-like connections. These type of connections show him to be a warm and quietly sentimental person, with a touch of elegance. There is a small margin on the left-hand side, despite there being no ruled line. This margin becomes slightly wider at the end of the page. This demonstrates the desire to leave the past behind and run towards the future. The distances between Paul's letters is mostly normal and regular. Paul's handwriting here is also regular in letter form, size, slant, and distance between words and lines, showing him to be a well-balanced person in general. His baseline direction is straight, comfortably hugging the ruler line. Normally, baseline is determined on unruled paper, but even here we can see Paul's ability to keep a straight and balanced line. This is associated with composure, dependability, and perseverance. The deliberate neatness of his writing necessarily slows its speed. In an adult's handwriting, this would reduce his assumed IQ, but given that he was a child, and this piece was probably part of a school assessment, the neatness would have been more important than the speed. The rhythm is steady and flow, and form level is simple with some good-humoured, albeit slightly vain, ornamentation on capitals. The eye dots are round and over the stem, which is a good sign. It means Paul was methodical and precise, with a good memory and concentration. His T-bars are mostly crossed midway up the downstroke and tending to the right of a stem, demonstrating a little nervous energy and impulsiveness, but a reasonable level of ego. The high retraced stem of his lowercase d's shows a quiet pride and dignity. He was not a person who would allow himself to be seen crying in public. A brief look at a postcard written to his parents shows that all of his small, neat, well-connected handwriting went straight out of the window when he rushed. Hold on to this point. It will matter later on. Now let's look at the teenage Paul, writing a letter to his brother Mike. I'm not going to go through every item again. I will simply note the changes and developments. Here the margins have extended outwards, making him a little more impulsive in nature than before. We finally see his personal pronoun I, which is a semi-dotted Palmer I in style. This means Paul is a little self-centered now, and definitely self-protecting. His capital letters have simplified, for the better. They, like the rest of his handwriting, are more mature and show increased speed. There are bigger extensions and loops in the lower zone. This shows he is a passionate but practical person. The development in this zone means he is down to earth, active, and has a good imagination. The smaller upper zone means that Paul is worried about the future, and his mental and creative life is slightly repressed compared to before. The spacing between the words is tighter, reflecting issues with ego. He wants to feel important to others and desires closeness, but those feelings are not quite being fulfilled. His handwriting has a few blind E's, which means he's now a little secretive. The The doodles are artful, good fun, and demonstrate a sense of humour. Now let's look at Paul's handwriting at 17 years old. By this point, Paul has a handwriting style described as a firm garland, with connections tending to be constructed from the bottom of an oval rather than the top. This assigns his emotional nature as warm and likely to be helpful to others. The slightly small size of his handwriting is a sign of increased secrecy. The ascending baseline translates into ambition and excitement. The capital D for dear and dad are different. The D, beginning the word dad, is a very unusual letter form style for his handwriting. It's more angular, indicating some conflict in his relationship with his father. This example was by an 18-year-old Paul. The loops on G's and Y's are now unfinished, denoting sexual frustration. There is more speed, lighter pressure, more angles, and connections between words that shouldn't be connected, e.g., a trip. Through these things we see he is quick-witted, but feeling the pressure of his own expectations weighing down on him. The clear and simplified letter forming is a sign of his efficiency to deal with a difficult situation, for example on the capital J's. In this semi-formal letter, we see his signature is plain and matching in style and size to the rest of his writing. This is very positive and demonstrates a lack of dishonesty. His signature's rising baseline means he is in command of himself and probably seen by others as charming. Its position at the center of the page matches his desire to want to be at the center of things. The simple underlining shows self-confidence. Underneath, Paul has written The Beatles, all in capitals, with 3 underlinings. He is very proud of the band and he wants to show it off to the letter's recipient. The band is all important to him. Paul's handwriting at 19 was becoming wider with increased spacing, showing him to be increasingly extroverted. These handwriting traits helped Billy once he officially became Paul, since he already possessed those traits in his own handwriting, as we shall see later. Next, let's look at Paul's handwriting from when he was in his early 20s. Please note that out of all of the examples of Paul's writing that I've used here, these are the ones I'm the least convinced are genuine. I've included them because there are a number of similar notes in existence from the early days of the Fab Four, all of which show signs of left-handedness and have some of Paul's repeated letter-forming characteristics. However, I am aware that much of their fan mail was answered by staff rather than the Beatles at that time. Although unusual, a person's handwriting can make dramatic shifts in style during adulthood if that person has been subjected to life-changing events. Becoming a band member of the biggest band in the world overnight would certainly count as a life-changing event. Also, it's likely that these notes were probably rushed, and this can quite dramatically alter handwriting appearance too. Here the slant and baseline are now mixed and erratic, showing emotional instability. We see here that Paul is very excitable and ambitious. His now maturer handwriting is longer and thinner. It's more angular and includes individualistic letter forms. This shows he is more creative than before. The development in the lower zone indicates he has more sexual energy, but also that he feels more under pressure from his current situation. The lighter pressure of the pen shows a slight losing of his sense of himself. His personal pronoun I's are good. Their clearer form means he is quicker in his thinking. His I dots, once very precise, are now erratic. Sometimes they are positioned high, or to the right, or even missing, along with some missing punctuation. This shows impatience, maybe even carelessness, and the tendency to constantly think about future events. Alongside this are optimistic T-bar crosses. Paul now has a new ascending signature, or possibly this is an autograph. Signatures and autographs are often not the same. Either way, this signature indicates restless and sexual energy, especially on the Y. but it also shows a lack of control too. There is an efficiency in the connection of the R to the T. In Memoirs, Billy describes the middle section of his signature as a reference to an obelisk, but I doubt that was Paul's motivation for including it. However, this opens up the possibility that Paul was instructed to include this feature in his new signature on purpose, partly because of its esoteric aspects, but maybe also because it gave Billy a head start in learning to copy it before Paul died. It would mean that their shared signature was new to both of them at the same time. Please also note, Paul did not usually connect the P and A in Paul because he did not normally connect capitals to lowercase letters. Billy, on the other hand, regularly connected capitals to lowercase letters, including the P and A in Paul in his signature. Answering fan mail at speed decreased the pressure of his handwriting. It also lengthened it. The dominant upper zones indicate someone who is an imaginative idealist and an intellectual dreamer. The dreams may be beautiful, but the author doesn't actually know how to fulfill them. In an attempt to counteract this, the letter forms are now sticks. These are associated with realistic and independent thinking. His large lower zones indicate increased base human urges and some feelings of restlessness. This is someone who craves excitement. The ascending but slightly erratic baselines reinforce this. They show Paul to be privately struggling with the pressure of fame, but also enjoying the roller coaster ride. In a moment we will look at examples of Billy's handwriting. They mostly come from the lyrics or Ringo's book, Postcards from the Boys. In the lyrics, samples of what is meant to be Paul's handwriting as a teenager are included, but I think they actually belong to Billy. The handwriting is generally quite different from Paul's, but one of my favourite specific differences between them is the way that Paul and Billy formed the capital D. Before I show you samples of Billy's handwriting, let's take a quick look at those capital Ds. Billy formed his capital D as a typical modern right-handed person, a simple downstroke and a sharp arch formed top to bottom, which then, unlike any copybook style, links to the next letter. You are, of course, not meant to connect capital letters when writing cursively. Paul formed his classic Palmer-styled capital D with a downstroke, a loop to the left, a flick to the right, and an upward arch towards the left. This style of letter form is possible for either hand, but suits the left-handed person well, because it finishes with an upward stroke away from the body. Despite the growing maturity of the execution of their handwriting, we can see in these examples the basic underlining letter form has remained the same over decades. Billy only ever made a genuine attempt to forge Paul's signature. He left the rest of his handwriting largely unaffected. However, now and again he incorporated elements of Paul's letter forming to give an air of authenticity to his handwriting, such as in this example on Apple notepaper. Compare the capital D's, G's, I's, and the words of, thanks, and Paul to Paul's real handwriting. The result is somewhat mixed. Anyway, let's now look at Billy's teenage writing. The first example is taken from a geography exercise book. The second one is from an English essay on Milton's Paradise Lost. The letter width, slant, spacing of letters within words and between them is slightly more erratic than Paul's writing at the same age. This indicates that Billy was emotionally and psychologically ill at ease. The wider gaps in particular mean that he doesn't trust the people around him, and he wants psychological or even actual physical space from them. He has more blind vowels, meaning he is more secretive. He also has plosive ovals, where the oval is filled with ink, indicating someone who might have a few anger issues. Although, like Paul, his handwriting is generally a firm garland in style, showing someone who is outgoing and generally level-headed, Billy's handwriting is more angular than Paul's. This means there's more tension in both his mind and body. His handwriting is bigger than Paul's, especially in the middle zone, which indicates a stronger sense of himself, especially in relation to others. His ego and willpower are stronger and more developed than Paul's. The right-hand margin is erratic, an indication of impulsiveness. The baseline is straight but slightly floats above the ruler line. This shows a breaking away from tradition. He is appearing to toe the line, but not actually doing so. We can also compare the obvious differences between Paul and Billy's teenage handwriting. Pause the video and take a look. In this essay about Paradise Lost, the section where he writes about Satan's infatuation with Eve shows increased energy and speed, leading to tightness and contraction in spacing. This is due to his interest and excitement in the topic. Here we have a postcard sent from Billy to Ringo during his road trip to Kenya with Mal Evans in 1966. Those who are familiar with the I Am a Phony videos will recognize the picture on the cover. It's the Shepherd Monument in Madrid, a little visual joke about his old surname on Billy's part. Billy was 29 when he wrote this postcard, having not long taken up the role of Paul. Billy attempts to imitate Paul's Palmer D at first, but then reverts to his own style. In fact, he does this on and off for the next few years, but eventually he mostly forgets about it. The baselines and slants on this postcard are variable. Some are straight, which should indicate mental stability, but worryingly, some lines fall at the end of otherwise straight lines. This is nicknamed the suicide fall, because it's regularly seen in suicide notes. In an actual suicide note, it is usually more dramatically seen, but even here it shows that he was anxious. Other sentences rise and fall. This demonstrates that he is ambitious, but lacking interest in the subject matter of the word in question. Towards the end there is a slight upward stepped cadencing of words. He is trying to overcome the desire to be outwardly excited. We see examples of this on the words indoors and Paul, his new name. Billy's letters have a bigger lower zone than before, seen on the letters Y, G and F, a sign of increased sexual energy and base human needs. The eye dots are all over the place, showing great imagination and enthusiasm when well placed and positioned high, but also showing impatience and impulsiveness when placed forward, or even procrastination and fear when placed behind. The deadpan joke after writing their names, Paul and Mal, available for social functions, is very telling. The baseline is straight and balanced and shows Billy is coping with the pressure of his situation through the use of humour, something which I can absolutely relate to. Here's another postcard from Billy to Ringo in 1968. Again we see another joke, cut the wisecracks, with a charming doodle of a lit candle rather than a written message. There is also a red heart instead of an eye dot in Ringo's name. Both of these demonstrate a warm, good-humoured and artistic tendency. On the address we see a backward slant, telling us Billy was leaning to the past with his thinking. This is a sign of repression and fear underneath an otherwise polished surface. It shows that he fell out of touch with himself, even though he may have seemed self-absorbed at the time. Backward slants also demonstrate the desire to be different and to appear so publicly. The other obvious change is the super simplified writing. We see in this postcard, and the next one, that when Billy is trying to apologize, his writing becomes usually very simple and almost childlike in its formation. We have to ask ourselves, is this just good humor, or is it a manipulation? It's harder to be angry with a child than an adult, because children are given special dispensation. Unless you are a very hard-hearted adult, you will probably find it's easy to forgive a child too. In addition, the block capitals make what he is saying more emphatic. In this postcard from May 1969, Billy sent Ringo a rebus puzzle. This is a great piece of imaginative fun mixed with logic. Here Billy's handwriting is more relaxed and more adult-like again. Lewis Carroll, who was a great influence on the Beatles, was a fan of rebus puzzles. He was also a tremendous letter writer. Here's an example of one of his rebus puzzles in a letter to a child friend on her birthday. He did not invent the puzzle, however, and there are many examples of rebus puzzles from the medieval period. Here are a couple in French and German. In this postcard sent in May 1969, Billy's handwriting shows that he is now relaxed. We can see this even through the capitals. The baseline and slants are straight, with small, regular spacing, indicating that he felt in control of his life and was generally happy. More of his true character is shining through in the letter form style and speed. The rounder forms are more friendly and outgoing. The doodles of his own family are fun, creative, and good-natured. There is a picture of a dog on the front cover of this postcard, hence him writing, "Woof, woof." In this letter on the left, from around 1970, we see Billy's handwriting, the same handwriting that we still see to this day. Look through the pages of the lyrics, and this is the handwriting that will greet you. Let's just compare it with two of the last samples of Paul's handwriting. It's hard to believe it's the same person, right? Do you see how Paul's later writing became more like Billy's rather than the other way around? I don't know if this was planned or not, but it certainly helped Billy. In the 70s, Billy's handwriting generally settled into a straighter baselines, which Paul had from a young age before the pressure of fame got to him. This is good for Billy. Straighter baselines show someone who is realistic, accurate, peaceful, and diplomatic. However, here in the lyrics to Maybe I'm Amazed, we still see more examples of the suicide fall on key words and phrases such as love you, lonely man, help me, and understand. The long plunge into the lower zone is very interesting, especially on the Y's, which often pull unusually to the right. They mean he is very firm and determined in his outlook concerning sex and his base human needs. There is a lot of energy here, even some fantasy, but it's not always realized. Possibly there's aggression, or, alternatively, it could be depression mixed with defensiveness. I've seen this style of Y in the handwriting of people I know have been sexually assaulted. Lastly, I've included a section of lyrics from Mull of Kintyre. Here the song is still work in progress. With a classic sense of humour, Billy has left off the C from the word chorus at the top of the page so that it read Horace. The C was then penciled in later. So what can we conclude from all of this? Whilst both men had a firm Garland handwriting style by adulthood, the execution of that style differs greatly, and key differences can also be found to set them apart. In short, Billy's handwriting is not like Paul's, and it never has been. The true Paul's handwriting, along with the rest of him, was gently eroded away and replaced with Billy Shears. Billy now holds the prize of having the official handwriting of Paul McCartney. If you have found this subject interesting and would like me to discuss the other Beatles' handwriting, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.